that we've worked on closely with the other agencies that impacts all of you on a day-to-day basis is a document called the Principles and Guidelines for Water Resources Planning. Essentially, this is the rules of the road, the system by which the Army Corps of Engineers, but now other federal agencies as well, make decisions about how, which projects will move forward, which projects should be proposed for funding, and making decisions about how to manage our water resources, how to manage our floodplains. And this really, I think, lays out the vision for what this administration thinks is the way forward. And I'd just like to read to you some of the national objectives. And again, you can find this on our website. Take a look at it. We received significant public comment. But the three key points, the national objectives as we make decisions about planning out the future of our water resources are: number one, to protect and restore natural ecosystems in the environment while encouraging sustainable economic development. Two, avoiding adverse impacts to natural ecosystems wherever possible and further mitigating any unavoidable impacts. And three, avoiding the unwise use of floodplains, flood-prone areas, and other ecologically valuable areas. Now, this particular document will go through quite a process before it becomes finally enacted through guidelines that each agency will put together. A draft was released in December, which was the result of CEQ, our office, bringing together well over a dozen federal agencies to be a part of putting this together. It is currently at review at the National Academies of Science. We received significant public comments on it, and a final draft of this will then happen after the National Academies of Science gives us their comments on it, after we see the public comments. And meanwhile, work is going on to put the guidelines together. Obviously, there's a long ways to go from policy statements like this all the way down to how are we actually going to implement these programs on the ground. But I can assure you that the people who are at the table working on these are, first of all, listening to what the public has to say about these issues, and they bring to the table that deep experience that I talked about of actually having gotten things done on the ground. But I think the theme that I would like to highlight most of all that runs through all of these initiatives of the Obama administration is really beating back the idea that there's this false choice between protecting the environment and creating jobs. For many years, that has been sort of the situation that's been set up. We can choose to build that levee and protect the jobs that we have in this town, or we can protect the birds and the fish and the bees over in that wetland. I think all of you are on the front lines and realize that that really is a false choice, that these things go hand in hand, that when we have a sustainable relationship with our natural resources, that we have the best opportunity for sustainable economic growth. For me, there's a personal example of this. I grew up in western Wisconsin in what's called the Driftless region. Our family has been on the same farm for over 100 years. It's that one part of the Midwest that has rolling hills and valleys, and was settled in the late 1880s. And about 1930 or so, it was really an ecosystem and an economy that was falling apart. The way that the land had been developed, Scandinavian and German farmers came over, and on those steep hills, they found that the easiest way to farm that region was just plow right up and down the hill. The horses liked it better when you went up and down the hill as opposed to along the contour. And by the 1930s, the hillsides were losing their topsoil. The hillsides that used to be covered in forest were being grazed, and floods would occur with just a 1-inch rainstorm event. The small towns along the waterways would be flooded. It was actually in this little valley where what is now the NRCS first did its first project, collaborated with local farmers to find a solution to this. And the solution wasn't to build up levees around those small towns. The solution wasn't, I guess they didn't really have the term non-structural solution back then, but what the federal government working with state and local government and the people on the ground, the solutions they came to were simply better management of the land. Instead of plowing up and down the hill, they invented contour farming. Instead of grazing those hillsides, they put up barbed wire and had the cows actually down in the pastures. An interesting little story, and the reason our valley was the one that was selected is because there was a banker there who was willing to give farmers loans to buy that barbed wire that allowed for the management of the land. So these are more than just words. This idea of it's not about choosing between environment and jobs. They're more than just words to me. They're more than just words to the people who are part of the Obama administration. And I'd really encourage you to take a look at some of these policies that we're talking about, to not just see what's on the paper, but be thinking about how they can happen in your hometown. Because the number one message I want to leave all of you with today is to make sure you walk out of this conference understanding the power that the people in this room have to actually make change and influence debate. These ideas that are part of the principles and guidelines that are part of what are being done in the Chesapeake Bay, these aren't ideas that came from sitting in an office in Washington, D.C., thinking things up. These are management practices, these are concepts, these are policies that have been developed on the front lines by all of you, by people like you. And as we move forward, as we push the federal government in this direction, I think my number one message is don't wait for us. If you take a look at the water resource, the P&G that I talked about, there's a section in there about watershed planning. We're planning on a watershed scale. We'll be working with the agencies to push federal decisions in that direction. But there's nothing stopping all of you right now from collaborating with the rest of the municipalities, the rest of the states in your watershed, and make this happen. I also really want to push all of you to be part of the public debate around these issues. I've worked in politics, I've worked on environmental issues. Some of the toughest political fights are over environmental issues. But let me tell you, the very toughest even of all of those are the issues that all of you deal with every day. An argument with the government of Japan over what we're going to do about international whaling has nothing to compare to a fight with the city council over what we're going to do about those new floodplain maps. You guys are at the heart of the very toughest debate, and I hope you realize the influence that you can have to bring common sense to these debates, because sometimes they just evolve into rhetoric. Over on one extreme, the federal government just trying to take control of everything. On the other side, corporations run amok. But the reality and the truth and what the solutions are much more complicated, and you guys understand them all. So become engaged in these debates. Take that new city council member who's railing on about those FEMA maps and take them down and show them the reality on the ground and what the real choices are. Or better yet, run for city council yourself. I actually think the number one problem with politics today is not the people who are in it, but the people who aren't in it, the people who have the knowledge, who can provide solutions, who aren't part of that public debate. So thank you for having me here today. Thank you so much for the work you're doing every single day. Encourage you to look at our website like I talked about, and wish you luck with the rest of the conference.